I've mentioned to you in the past that growing up, my siblings and I were what we refer back to as TV starved. You know, our parents were very selective about what they let us watch and when, and by and large, I'm grateful. Now I'm grateful. One of the shows that made the cut, I'm sure it's familiar to all of us, is the Looney Tunes, you know? Even had to ask one of my servers, I'm like, did those cartoon characters ever say anything, or was it just all sound effects? I think it was all sound effects. Do you ever remember the character Wile E. Coyote? I wonder what you remember about Wile E. Coyote. Was he peaceful? It seems that Wile E. Coyote's whole sort of, what he was consumed by was how he was going to get the Roadrunner, you know? He was consumed by it. That was what he was always preparing for. He was sort of planning, and if you recall, it always backfired. It never worked. In some ways, Wile E. Coyote is an instance, in a light way, of what Jesus said when he said, "Those who live by the sword die by the sword." You know? You've heard me say, and I firmly believe this, I'm convicted of this, that the health of any family, community, parish, can largely be gauged on how well we are willing to enter in and do conflict. You see, there are consequences to just avoiding or withdrawal, or like going aggressive. In fact, I've had elders that I respect and venerate who have expressed for some years now concern about the health of our country. And when I listen to them, I think this is what they're getting at. Like, it's a very sick society when actually we have no hope of gaining anything positive for one another by entering constructively into conflict. And the reality is you can't live, you can't love without conflict arising. It's just to be human. Whether it's with your spouse or with your children or with your siblings or with the person to your right or to your left. It's just a fact of life. So Jesus in the gospel today wants to encourage you and I around this delicate place where love, like "oh, no one anything but to love," sort of phrase. And I want you, if you can be a little light, about the Wile E. Coyote in you. You know? Like when you get hurt, when someone offends you, when someone does something, what does it trigger? What's your normal habits and patterns? I want to just give some few impressions from this gospel. Like Jesus telling us how to do this. The first thing you'll notice is that it requires discernment. Notice he says, if your brother or sister sins against you. Wait a minute. So not everything that offends me is worth me getting worked up about or requires me to go to my neighbor. That's true. He doesn't say if your sister annoys you, well then, you know, just take it to her. We have to actually discern this. So the first thing is not reacting. Not reacting from hurt or from anger or from sadness. Like there's actually a discernment that this entails. Secondly, notice how the whole thing begins as something very personal and private. Jesus says, go to him, go to her. Have that conversation. I think what we have to be so careful about, the Wile E. Coyote, is strategizing to trap another person. To get them back, to win at all costs. In fact, he's asking us to do something much more magnanimous, large-souled. Like we actually have their good in mind. And we go to them. And then the third impression is that notice the whole goal of this sequence is the good of another person. It's reconciliation. It's growth. It might help you to remember the context of this gospel and how important context is. Do you know what comes right before these verses? Jesus talking about the good shepherd leaving the 99 and going in search of the one, and rejoicing when he can find the one and bring it back to the 99. It's telling us that the heart of God is always seeking reconciliation with us, between one another. Like that's the heart of God. And then what's on the end of this sequence? He says, where 2 or 3 of you are gathered, and not just gathered, I mean, there's a lot gathered today, several hundred. But gathered and agree, like a unity that you've had to work for it. Like unity doesn't just happen. It's a precious gift and a labor. So, if all that's true, then a couple of things I want to tell you. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of the risk in relationship. You're not in control of the result, but you can take the risk and be faithful to what the Lord's asking to do. Second, make sure you have the tact, because you want to approach them in a way that gives them the best opportunity to receive something that's difficult. And then, even if it doesn't work out, notice that we're never to definitively close a door. We always want to leave the door open. Now, all that being said, I want to give you 5 quick points that have been so helpful to me when this arises in my life. And you know, as pastor, I get to enter into any number of these. I'm on the sequence, as part of the church. And when this happens, I don't blame people that there's a conflict. Like, that's just part of being human. It's part of trying to live and to love with an open heart in an authentic way. But then, I do have this great hope that something good for everyone can arise, and there can be a new depth, a new path forward. So here are the 5 things. ASAP. You want to go to your neighbor, not reacting, so that's too quick. But you don't want to hold on to it and let it fester. Wile E. Coyote. You remember what Scripture says? Don't let the sun go down on your anger. Like, go as quick as you're able to. Because otherwise, to be honest, the person, it might feel like it was 20 miles in the past. Second, speak directly. Versus about the person or letting it come out sideways. Like, it's such a dignifying thing to say, go to them. They might actually be honored that you're bringing this to them. Thirdly, speak concisely and concretely. What's the opposite of this? Well, you're scolding them. You're exaggerating their offense because you've built a case. No, you're actually just saying, this is what happened. And this is how it affected me. Fourth, I think this is the key. Refrain from judging motives. Only God can see the heart. You and I can't. And so when we, from our hurt, start assuming motives about this other person, we're already going down a rabbit hole. And we're not setting this thing up to be a positive, constructive interaction. So again, speak to the facts, how it affected you. And then number 5, and this might be the hardest, speak out of love and not vengeance. You know, I've been so much freer after 20 years as a pastor where someone will come to me and bring me something difficult with another member of the community, or whether it's on my wonderful large staff, And I'll listen, and I'll say, have you spoken to this person? Because otherwise, if I try to get involved, it's not ordered. And if you were to speak to this person, how would you do it? So in some ways, my interaction with them is to serve them, coach them, and encourage them. And then sometimes it'll become clear in the conversation, they're not ready, and that's okay. They're not at that place of love yet. They're just going to go to the person, and too much hurt is going to come out. Final thing I want to say today, this is really important, is to all of us when we're on the receiving end of fraternal correction. So it's one thing, I've spent a lot of the time, as Jesus did, saying, here's what you do, but how about when it comes to you? Does that feel good? Aren't you like, I woke up today and I was hoping someone would correct me. Is that human nature? And you know what our temptation is? To say, their bedside manner was off, it wasn't good. If someone else corrected me, I could receive it. But this person, heck no. They got more faults than they know. And we go through the litany. And pretty soon we're on the defense and our heart's not open. Some of the greatest graces of my life have come from people who have had the courage to correct me. Sometimes they've done it more gently than others. But with the Lord's grace, there's always something for me to take, something for me to receive. I really believe this, that this is one of the ways as believers we can become so countercultural, such a sign of hope. There is a lack of hope that when we bump into each other, it can actually be just the beginning of something new, a greater depth, a new richness and meaningfulness. We just bump into each other and then we avoid each other. And if our leaders are doing that, and if adults are doing that, I guarantee you our young people are doing that. So they have a teenage conflict. Do you ever have one yourself? But now they find a way for 3 years just to avoid each other. I think we're going to be missing out on so much of life, so much about what God has for us, if that's our modus operandi. And today, Jesus speaks directly to this place. It's not a matter of whether you have conflict in relationships. It's just when, and with whom, and how. But Jesus says, do not be afraid. There is a way forward. And this is good news.